Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Drew Powers, the city manager for the city of Thousand Oaks. And I know based on those of you that have signed up for this evening, and those of you that are watching our live stream, that we have a tremendous degree of engagement this evening, which is fantastic. And as Matt just mentioned to us, over 350 registrants for our Zoom portion, which is just fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to be here. Tonight is the culmination of 18 months worth of public input, small sessions and large, to bring us to this point where we've reached an important milestone. And that is to talk about the land use alternatives in our general plan. Who could have imagined that we would be here in this place right now doing this session virtually when we began this process many months ago. But to me, there's two benefits. One, I think we're getting even greater participation in our virtual setting now than we might have in an in-person session. And two, a comprehensive general plan update is more critical to communities in California and across the country today than it's ever been as we move into a post-pandemic world and the various implications of land use on society that are emerging. So with that, the team has worked hard to get to this point tonight. Matt's going to walk you through a lot of details. Tonight is really about setting the table. And over the next couple of months, there's going to be numerous opportunities for engagement, question and answer, a chance for you to complete survey. But I wanted to conclude my opening remarks by reading a portion in the briefing book. And if you hadn't had a chance to dive into the briefing book, it really is a well laid out document. And I commend the team that worked so hard to get to this point. In the first, one of the beginning paragraphs, it says, cities are not static. They evolve and change over time. Residents move in and out, new businesses open and others close. Buildings are renovated or replaced, and streets, trails, parks, and public buildings are renovated over time. To remain a great place to live and work, cities must evolve to meet changing demographics, economic situations, and regulatory challenges. This general plan process, the first comprehensive update since the original was adopted in 1970, is intended to take a comprehensive look at the city of Thousand Oaks today and plan for the next 25 years and beyond. It's really important to remember that time horizon. As I'm fortunate to sit on the city council with one member that was there in 1970 to craft the original general plan and to think about that time horizon that they were looking at. The same challenges exist today for this group of GPAC members, our engaged citizenry, our city council, as they move down the path of crafting the next general plan to last us the next 25 years. Thanks for giving me a chance to speak. I'd like to hand it over to Mr. Matt Ramey to begin tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Drew. Good evening, everyone. I am Matt Ramey with Ramey & Associates. We are the lead consultant on the general plan update. And for the last year and a half, we've been working with the General Plan Advisory Committee and the community to get where we are today, which is at really a critical juncture in the general plan process. Tonight's meeting is a joint General Plan Advisory Committee and a public workshop. The purpose of tonight's meeting is, as Drew said, to set the table. There is going to be a lot of information presented this evening, and we are going to have some time for question and answer from the public. But rest assured, tonight is just about understanding. And over the next month, there's going to be ample opportunity for the community and for the GPAC to ask questions, to dive deeper into the alternatives, and to make informed recommendations. Tonight is about understanding. Starting tomorrow, it's about responding, and then moving forward, it's about deciding. So I ask you this evening to bear with us as we go through the presentation and present this really important information. I also wanted to point out as we're starting that these land use alternatives are a way of testing the ideas that have been expressed during the process so far. We've spent quite a bit of time talking about ideas, talking about what we might want to see in the community. And this is an opportunity to take those words and show different ways that those words can be expressed into the physical form of the community. I'm going to move through the, start moving through the presentation here. Of course, my slides are not working. There we go. Okay, for the members of the public, the opportunity to participate this evening is through the question and answer form. As Drew said, over 350 people signed up for this meeting. And at this point, we have over 200 people participating, which is absolutely incredible. And we really appreciate everyone's time this evening. So if you'd like to ask a question throughout the presentation, please go to the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen and type in your question. We have folks who are looking at those questions, and we will take breaks during the presentation to respond to some of the questions that are asked. We're going to answer as many questions as we can this evening, but rest assured, and there will be opportunities for you all to ask more questions of us, of the general plan team, moving forward in sessions that we will discuss later on. Our agenda this evening is going to be first a background on the land use alternatives. We're going to give a presentation and then lead to question and answer. And then we'll, after that, we will go and provide a summary of the land use alternatives, a presentation and then a question and answer, and then the closing and next steps. The objectives of what we want to do this evening is first, we want to describe how the previous engagement tasks informed the development of the land use alternatives. Second, we want to provide detailed explanation of the various land use alternatives. Third, we want to answer questions from the General Plan Advisory Committee and the public about these alternatives. And finally, we want to give you instructions on how and when you are going to be able to provide feedback. Again, the purpose of this workshop is to provide an overview of the alternatives, and the feedback on the alternatives will be collected through online and paper surveys. So the process that we are going to move forward with over the next month is that tonight is listening and asking questions. We're also going to have a series of virtual poll questions, and Melissa Stark from Raymond Associates is going to lead us through those poll questions. After that, we would ask that everyone review the briefing book. It's about a 70-page document and has lots of information about the differences between the alternatives and how we got to where we are today. We're going to have 4 office hours, virtual office hours, where we're going to be available to answer questions. So after you review the briefing book and potentially before you complete the survey, you can come and talk to us and ask us questions about the different alternatives. And then the final step is completing the survey. Okay, we're going to do our first live poll. Melissa, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Matt. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to start off tonight with a poll, and it's actually made up of a series of 4 questions. I'm going to launch it right now, and then I'm going to walk through each of the questions for you. So on your screen, you should now see poll in progress, and the first question is, do you live and or work in Thousand Oaks? And there's a series of answers below, including live, work, own a business, on a property, or none of the above. If you continue scrolling down, the second question is, if you live in Thousand Oaks, how long have you lived here? Responses include 1 year or less, 2 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, 11 to 20 years, 21 to 30 years, 31 years plus, or I don't live in Thousand Oaks. If you continue scrolling down, the next question is, if you live in Thousand Oaks, do you rent or own your home? Answers are rent or own. And the last question is, what is your age? And there's a series of age ranges starting from under 18 and up to 65. We'll take a few more seconds here until we see a majority of folks have responded, and then we'll actually be sharing the results for everyone to see.
Okay, and just a reminder for folks that you can use the question and answer feature throughout the presentation to ask questions, and we will answer as many questions as we can during the presentation.
And for those who are watching live online, if you'd like to participate in our polls or asking, there's a link either in the description below or on the project website, which is toaks2045.org. Wait a few more seconds here.
Okay,
all right, we're going to close the
last chance. 83% have voted. Okay.
All right, now you should see, go ahead, Matt.
Okay, so this, now you should see the results of the screen, of the results of the voting. So 81% of the people live in the city. So the majority of you are residents, and only 4%, 6 people are none of the above, and some are property owners and some just work here. In terms of, for those, if the folks who live in Thousand Oaks, the majority of you, a third actually, have lived here for 31 years or more. So a lot of folks who have been in the community for quite a long time, and not as many, only about 10% who have been here for 10 years or less. So, and if people, if you live in Thousand Oaks, do you rent or own your home? And 85% of the folks who participated, who have answered the question, so vast majority live here. And the age is predominantly, more than half is 45 to 64. Okay, thank you, Melissa. I'm going to, we're going to move on from the poll here and jump into the presentation. Now, as we're doing this, the purpose of the poll questions is to have some interaction, to have you all start thinking about what some of the questions we're going to ask in the survey are. However, these are not going to be the final results of what moves forward to the Planning Commission and City Council for recommendation on the alternatives. These are merely to give us our initial benchmark about where people stand on these different topics. Okay, so the general plan process. My computer is being very slow this evening, apologies. Okay. And wouldn't you know it? Now it's flying ahead. Let me go back up one slide. There we go. So the question, just to make sure everyone is on the same page, that we have here is we are creating a general plan. A general plan is a long-term policy document that guides the future actions in Thousand Oaks. It has a series of policy choices and development applications. Those are examples of future actions. I want to stress that the general plan establishes a long-term vision for the city. It is not about what happens tomorrow or next year. It's really about how we think about how the community will grow and evolve over the next 25 to 50 years. As Drew mentioned, the last general plan, the first general plan, was adopted in 1970, which was over 50 years ago. So we need to really think about that long time horizon when we are thinking tonight about what the alternatives might be for the future of the city. The general plan is about preserving and enhancing the community's strengths, of which, as you know, there are many in Thousand Oaks. But it's also about addressing the topics of concern in the community. Ultimately, the general plan is an opportunity for the community to come together to develop a shared vision for the future. And I really want to stress this point because this is the opportunity over the next few months to talk about the future development patterns in the city of Thousand Oaks. Not everyone's going to agree. We know that people have different ideas, people have different expressions about what the city should look like in the next 25 to 50 years. That's okay. That is part of the process. The dialogue and the discourse is really part of the process. As I mentioned, we've been working for about a year and a half. We got slowed down a little bit by the COVID pandemic, but we are now here in the policy development and plan alternatives phase of work. That's going to go into the spring and then into the summer, early summer. And the next phase after that will be developing the plan, which will happen in the spring and summer, and then into review and adoption, which will happen in 2022. We've done a lot of community engagement activities, particularly in about a year ago, pre-pandemic. We have a general plan advisory committee meeting, which is a group of 24 individuals who are our sounding board for ideas. And that group has met 12 times throughout the process. This is the 13th meeting of this group. And in addition to the GPAC, there have been 25 to 50 members of the public at each of those meetings. And at each meeting, we allowed the community the public to participate and answer the questions in the same way that the General Plan Advisory Committee did. In September of 2019, we had a public workshop and over 125 people attended that workshop. We've had pop-up workshops where we just showed up in different places and asked people questions. And we've had 11 of those with over 1,000 people stopping by to hear about the process. We've had focus groups, a couple of community forums, interviews with individuals and small groups. And then we've had 2 online surveys, which I will talk about in a minute, and over 1,000 people responded to that. And in addition, the city did a statistically valid survey, which asked some questions about growth and development in the city. So overall, a lot of engagement has happened during the process, and we look forward to that engagement continuing on into the future. So our next poll is a quick poll. We want to get a sense of who's here tonight and how much each, and whether people have participated in past events or not. So Melissa, if you could please start the poll number 2, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So we're launching the second poll, and this just has one question, and it asks, how many general plan related meetings and events have you attended? Options are none, this is my first, 1 to 3 meetings, 4 to 6 meetings, 7 or more meetings. And we'll pause for just a few more seconds while everybody responds to this poll.
Wow, over 200 people here this evening. That's great.
All right, we're going to go ahead and close this poll and share results with everyone.
Okay, as the results, as you can see here in the results, 42% of the people have never attended a general plan meeting before, and 40% have only been to 1 to 3 meetings. So for a lot of you, this is really your first or really preliminary introduction to the general plan update process. We welcome you to the process. As I said, it's been going on for about a year and a half, but it's never too late to join. This is absolutely a critical time. We are gonna, in a minute, talk about what we've done in the past so that everybody can be brought up to speed on where we are. Okay, let's see if my computer will stop glitching. There we go. So at the very beginning of the process, we were asked to think about what are the benefits of an updated general plan. So if the general plan has been working for 50 years, why in the world would we want to actually make any changes to it? Thousand Oaks is a great place to live and work, so why do we need to do this? It's a very valid question, but there are some real good reasons why it needs to happen. First is that general plans are meant to be updated on a regular basis. They're meant to remain current, and that is part of state law, that they remain current. The next, if my slide ever starts working, I think after the live polls, it stops. The second, I'll just keep talking while my screen decides to stop acting up here. The second is that the community has changed a lot since 1970. And 1970 is when the last land use plan was created in the city. And in 1970, the city had 34,500 people. Today, there's over 130,000 people in the city. There we go. In 1970, there was 79% of the land in the city was vacant. Today, there's 5%. There was 10% residential land, and now there's 35%. In 1970, there was 2% of the land for parks, open spaces. Now there's 43%. And most of the land that is parks and open space is now is publicly owned. So part of the vision of that plan was to create a huge amount of parks and open space, and the city was very successful in doing that. The next reason is that the city needs to maintain a high quality of public services. There's a direct connection between public facilities and services and the quality of life in the community and how land is developed in the city and the pattern of development. That's represented here, where the residential population, the jobs, and the visitors all end up with providing tax and revenues for the city in terms of retail and sales tax, property tax, or transient occupancy tax, which is hotel taxes. That leads to revenues for the city, and then the revenues pay for public facilities and services, and this leads to the quality of life in the city. The next is that it was expressed throughout the process that you want to protect your single-family neighborhoods, and the plan is such that the way it is designed now, that that may not actually happen. And so we want to make sure that the updated general plan is able to protect the single-family neighborhoods, which was expressed besides parks and open space as the #1 asset in the community. The fourth is that we need to be able, people expressed the need to provide housing opportunities, but the state has also been very active in recent years in pushing development, residential development in particular, in communities. And we need to, we have the opportunity here to provide housing opportunities that you want to provide to meet state requirements in the way that you all want to do that. We want to make sure that there is local control over these decisions and that there's a public dialogue around this. The city needs to retain and attract employers. This is really critical to make sure that tax revenues are continuing to grow in the city, but also the employers need, their employees need a place to live, and they want a certain quality of life and a quality of environment. As you all know, housing has gotten very expensive in Thousand Oaks, and there are many people who teach at CLU or who work at Amgen who can't afford to live in the community. Therefore, they have to drive from far away in order to come here. So we need to think about what it is that is going to take to retain and attract employees. The next is that that retail has changed over the last 10 years, and in particular, it's changing rapidly because of COVID. The city overall has more retail areas and more retail space than it needs at this point. And so we need to think about how we can re-envision those underperforming retail areas to help meet other needs in the city to create these co-benefits. And then finally, there is a need to think about how the city, through the general plan, can address climate change impacts. I know that there was a meeting last week to discuss the city's climate action plan. And as part of that meeting, information was presented on the community greenhouse gas emissions from 2018. And as you can see in this picture here, that transportation is 50% of the community greenhouse gas emissions. Transportation is, that number is very high because people are driving to get into and out of the city for jobs. And so there is a direct connection between the pattern of development in the city and greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Now, as we start jumping through some of the content, I want to go through some of the terminology to make sure that we're all on the same page. And I apologize, there's going to be some pretty technical information here. Some of this was presented previously to the GPAC members, so apologies for presenting it again. However, I want to make sure, again, everyone is on the same page. So when we think about housing, housing is measured in terms of housing units per acre or dwelling units per acre. It's also called housing density. You can, to a certain degree, tell the density of a building based on what it looks like, but not always, as I'll show in just a second. So when we think about density, single-family homes are about 5 units an acre. That's about a 8,000 square foot lot, which is about average for the single-family homes in Thousand Oaks. Row houses or townhouses tend to be about 15 dwelling units per acre. And then the multifamily housing, depending on the size of the building and depending on the size of the unit, can vary between 20 and 50 plus units per acre. This is just one example of an image that's about 50 units per acre. Non-residential development is a little bit more complex because it's measured in something called floor area ratio. This is the ratio of the amount of building space, the volume of the building, in relation to the area, the land area on which the building is sitting, so the parcel of land. And so the important point here is that floor area ratio measures the volume of the building, but that volume can be reached in multiple different ways. Here's an example. If you have an FAR, or floor area ratio, of 1.0, that means that you have an equal amount of building volume as you do parcel and parcel square footage. You can achieve an FAR of 1.0 by having a 1-story building covering 100% of the site. You can have an FAR of 1.0 by having a 2-story building covering 50% of the site. And you can have an FAR of 1.0 by having a 4-story building on 25% of the site. So FAR helps because it shows what the building volume is, but it really doesn't tell you exactly what that building is going to look like. There are other requirements in a zoning code that will tell you what that looks like. So the point here is that numbers really aren't everything. And we have to remember that it's also the character that you're trying to achieve and what that building does to the character of the community. When we think about density, the density depends on the size of the units in multifamily buildings. This is an important point to remember. Let me show you, density does not actually reflect how big or tall the building is, just like FAR doesn't reflect how big or tall the building is. So here's an example. If you have a parcel size which is 1 acre and a building which is 48,000 square feet. So that gives you an FAR of approximately 1.1. An acre, for those who don't know, is 43,560 square feet. So 48,000 over 43,560 is about 1.1. If you have units that are average 1,800 square feet each, which would be about 1,400 square feet once you address the building circulation, you would end up with a density of 27 units an acre. If the unit size is about 1,000 square feet, which is mostly 1 and 2 bedroom units, in that same building volume, you would end up with 48 units an acre. And if the unit size was about 750 on average, which is a lot of studios and 1 bedrooms, you would end up with 64 dwelling units per acre. From the outside, it is the same building. The only difference is the number of windows. But you could actually build the same building with essentially a very different number of dwelling units per acre. So we need to keep that in mind as we are thinking about density. The next term to talk about is mixed use. And we hear a lot about mixed use in the planning world. And there's really 2 kinds of mixed use: vertical mixed use and horizontal mixed use. Vertical mixed use is essentially defined as residential units over retail or commercial space. There's some examples on the left. Horizontal mixed use is when you have a mix of uses in an area. So you might actually have townhomes, as you see in the picture on the right here, or small stacked flats adjacent to retail and office space. That area would be considered horizontal mixed use. And when we talk about mixed use in Thousand Oaks, we're talking about both vertical and horizontal mixed use. The next is really important because it affects Measure E. And that is the term the terms of build out versus growth projections. Build out is the term where every parcel in a city is built to its maximum capacity. So if you have a parcel that allows 20 units an acre, then full build out is building 20 units an acre on that parcel. For an entire city that is as big as Thousand Oaks, which is 50 square miles, it is unlikely to ever be achieved. And there's really no time horizon for that. So what it does is it's not really a good measure of the number of people who will be living in the city in the future, particularly in a 25 to 30 year time horizon that we're looking at in the general plan. The other term is a growth projection. A growth projection projects the amount of growth that is expected to happen in a certain period of time. For this general plan, we're looking at the year 2045. These are used for realistic estimates of growth based on market and other economic conditions. And so these are very different terms here. And when someone says, what's the build out of the plan, we need to remember that build out is a term for full maximum build out, which is unlikely to be achieved. And growth projection is the amount of growth that we expect to happen over a period of time. And if that wasn't technical enough, now I'm going to get a little bit more technical, because there's two other terms that we need that are helping, they're really guiding what we're doing here in the general plan. The first is the term called the RHNA requirements. RHNA stands for Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And this is a process that happens in California, where the state determines a number of housing units that need to be built in a region, and then the regional governments allocate that amount of housing to jurisdictions. This is not about building housing. This is about identifying parcels that will allow that housing to be built. It's an important distinction here. So the general plans typically look at 3 to 4 RHNA cycles. A RHNA cycle is every 8 years. So every 8 years, the city is required to update its housing element, which is how it identifies what those RHNA numbers are, the housing numbers. And so if this plan is a 25 to 35 year plan, we really need to look at the amount of growth over 3 to 4 RHNA cycles. There are requirements for those RHNA, for the appropriate sites for RHNA, and they include that it has to be for low income and very low income, 30 units an acre. There has to be sites that you actually have to be able to build on those sites. So you can't just identify a wetland and say, hey, this is going to be our RHNA site, or something with a building already. It has to be something that could potentially be built in the next 8 years. And the city from the regional government was given a RHNA allocation for the next 8 years of 2,615 units. Again, this is not the number of units that is actually going to be built. This is what the city needs to plan for and accommodate through its process. The next is Measure E, and that is the local ballot initiative that was approved in 1996, and it sunsets in 2026. And what this did was this said that there can be no net increase in residential capacity or commercial land area above what was in the 1996 general plan land use map. And when you look at that capacity, the build out, and again, remember the term build out here, not growth projection, build out is 81,124 units. That's a lot of housing units, especially because the existing number of units in the city is 48,081 approximately. So that means there's a remaining capacity throughout the city based on the existing general plan map of 33,043. Now, you may be asking yourself and saying to yourself, wow, 81,124 is a lot of housing in this city. Why can't we just reduce the number? Well, as I mentioned previously, the state has really spent the last few years coming up with new housing policies and regulations for cities. And one of those was passed in 2019, which is called SB 330. And the main point of this is that jurisdictions cannot have a net loss in residential capacity in the city. That means that you can't just downzone a whole bunch of areas and reduce the capacity in the city from 81,000 to 60,000. You need to actually keep the capacity of 81,124 units. And so the combination of this, you can reallocate where it is in the city, but you just can't downzone overall in the city. And the reality of this is that, that measure E, when you combine measure E, which means you can't increase over the 81,000, and SB 330, which means that you can't reduce below 81,000, is that the number that we are planning for in terms of build out capacity is 81,124 units. Now, again, that is not a number that anyone thinks will ever be built in this city, but it's a number that we need to think about when we're doing our planning process. Okay, I am going to pause for 1 second here and see if there are any questions from the public that we can answer. Simran and Ian, let's see if we can take a question or two and see what people have asked so far. Who's in charge?
Hi, everyone. We've been monitoring the question and answer feature and answering several questions as we go along. There are some that the answers of to those questions will be presented as the presentation unfolds. So we are withholding answers so you can hear it directly from Matt. There are a couple of questions regarding if parking is included in FAR ratios and how is density calculated. Matt just walked us through how density is calculated and how FAR is calculated. Parking is included in the FAR number if it is structured parking and above grade. If it is below grade, it would not count towards the FAR number. Ian, did you have a question that you wanted to answer?
No, I didn't have one to add.
All right. Well,
there's some very good ideas that are coming through, which we can circle back later on in the presentation.
Okay, great. All right, so we are going to go through just another section, and then we're going to open it up for the General Plan Advisory Committee to ask some questions of what you've heard so far. So GPAC members, please, please get your questions ready. We can answer some questions, and then we'll keep moving on. And every time I pause, there is my computer freezes. Okay. I will just keep moving. So the flow of work that we have had to get to the stage where we are now, I had mentioned it briefly, but our engagement process that we have worked on has resulted in a series of products. And so we started the process by asking residents, what are the strengths, values, issues, and challenges in the community? And we had a public survey that had over 600 respondents for that. We had pop-up workshops, as I had mentioned, which generated a lot of information and a lot of ideas. And we boiled all of that information down into draft guiding principles. Once we had those draft guiding principles, we then asked the question of, if there's going to be any change in the city, new development that's going to happen in the city, where should that change happen? And so we did an interactive exercise with the General Plan Advisory Committee initially, and members of the public also participated in that. And there were, I think, 30 or 40 people from the public who were there. And we asked the question of where would growth go? And people actually put the majority of game pieces, stickers that we gave them in about the same spots. Once we did that, we asked what areas should be preserved from development. And what we ended up with that was a series of maps. One was called the areas of change, which were the areas where potential change could happen. and the other is areas of stability. And I'll talk about those later. Then when we had the areas of change, we did another online survey, where we asked the question of, in those areas of change, what could be built there? And that information and those discussions led us to the land use alternatives that we are going to talk about today. Part of this process that we are doing is really about balancing the strengths in the community and the issues. And the strengths that we've heard about from many of you are that there's a really high quality of life in the community. You all love the open spaces and natural areas. There are really attractive single-family neighborhoods. You like the predominant suburban character, and in fact, the statement that many of you used and responded to is a fear of becoming valley. And there was also a commitment to stick with Measure E and not go above what those projections are, those growth, the build-out numbers. However, there were lots of ideas about how the city could change and improve over time. There were ideas for more activity centers and gathering places, and the downtown master plan process was one of those. Was one of the times when people really said, "Hey, we need a downtown here. We need a place where we can go, where we can meet, where we can hang out." There was a call for a diversity of housing and lower cost housing. So a diversity of housing types, so more multifamily housing and lower cost housing, so that people who maybe grew up here could come and move back here. Melissa Stark, who you heard from on my team, actually grew up in Thousand Oaks, and I know that she's thought about moving back at some point. So, could she afford a place? Is there a place for her to live in the city? There were lots of concerns about aging and vacant retail and low quality retail that's happening in certain areas of the city. There were fears of loss of economic competitiveness and a desire to meet the new state laws for housing. And what this ends up with is that there ends up sort of being a tension here of how do you preserve the strengths in the community and address the issues in a way that meets the needs of everybody. So how do you balance that strength and the strengths and the issues, allow for change, but not have so much change that it changes what the city essentially is and what you love about the city? And that's the tension that we're really talking about in these land use alternatives, is how do we think about an evolution of the city? Because we know that cities change and evolve over time, but how can that evolution happen so that you get the benefits without impacts from that? Again, there's not a clear answer, but that is what this discourse that we are embarking on now is about. I had mentioned that guiding principles were developed. These are online as in a draft form, and we encourage everyone to go and look at those. But those guiding principles provide that framework for future decision making. The guiding principles are divided into community values and key strategies, and they help with defining the alternatives, crafting goals, and identifying trade-offs. I'm going to quickly walk through some of the maps and some of the results that we had from the process so that you can get a sense for the 82% of you who have participated in less than 3 meetings. I want to make sure that people are all on the same page about what happened. So in February of 2020, just about a year ago, we asked the GPAC members and the public who attended the meeting to identify areas where they wanted to see different types of development. We gave stickers for different types of uses, and this is a composite map of what people said in terms of and each sticker, each color is something different. The orange is mixed use, the green is open space, the red is multifamily residential, and so we asked where these uses should go. We also asked in these different areas what people wanted to see, and so we got a lot of ideas for specific geographic areas based on the stickers that people put down, as well as the terms that people had said. And things that came up a lot were mixed use and multifamily housing at potentially higher densities than where there is now, boutique hotels, entertainment, places for people to walk. People want a vibrant downtown. And then again, shopping. And these are the things that actually people expressed enhance the quality of life in the community. Once we had that information, we then did an online survey through a tool called MetroQuest. And we asked people to prioritize the strengths and values and the issues and challenges in the community. And then we asked people to place virtual stickers on the map about where they wanted to see different types of uses. And we gave people the opportunity to place townhomes, multifamily housing, mixed use, office R&D, entertainment, and parks and open space. And as you can see in the table here, 461 people took the survey. People could put as many markers down as they wanted. The two with the most markers that were put down on the map were mixed use and multifamily housing, and there were almost 1,000, and that was way higher than the next, which was parks and open space. The map on the right shows some of the locations in terms of concentrations where people identified what where mixed use could go. So this map is just mixed use, and then you can really clearly see here what people are thinking in the area where the Oaks Mall is and Jan's Marketplace, as well as downtown, where locations for mixed use development. Based on this information, we created a map which we call the areas of change map. The inverse of that is the areas of stability. And so this map actually shows both areas of change and areas of stability. The purple we're calling major nodes, and then the red are neighborhood and village centers, which was an idea that came out of the engagement process to create a series of mixed-use village centers throughout the community. The city, as we know, is quite large, and the areas of change only about 7.9% of the total area of the city. So that means that 92.1% of the city is really expected to just completely stay the same, and that the only places where we would expect any change, if there is even any, is going to be in that 7.9%. Okay, let me go through one more section, and then we're going to get to a question and answer. So general plans, one of the major components of a general plan is the land use element, which is one of the required chapters of the general plan. And the core component of that is called a land use designation. The land use designation is the intended use on every parcel in the city, and it identifies the allowed uses and the density of development. The map that you see here is the existing land use designation map, and that is associated with descriptions of each of the designations and the range of densities, and this is the range of densities for residential development. So as you can see here, you have very low density, which is 0 to 2 dwelling units per acre. That means that it's approximately at most 20,000 square foot lots. Low density is 2 to 4.5 units per acre, and then medium density is 4.6 to 15. High density is 15 to 30 units an acre. And I want to point out that the medium density allows for single family homes, which are about 5 units per acre, but it also allows, the density also allows townhomes, condominiums, mobile homes, and even small apartments within that designation. So there are some challenges with the existing general plan land use. One is it doesn't meet the state mandated housing requirements that I discussed previously, the RENA numbers. And there are potential consequences of having a non-compliant housing element. So we absolutely need to make changes in order to make sure that the housing element is compliant. There are more opportunities for walkable development that are needed to meet the housing needs in the city and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We need to identify an appropriate balance of retail and commercial, and identify what should happen to the areas of the city that are retail and commercial that may not be viable into the future. And then we need more opportunities for a diversity of housing types, workforce housing, and affordable housing. So based on the information from the public and based on the existing general plan designations, we came up with a series of proposed land use designations. There are multiple categories of designations, starting with residential. And what we did here with the residential designations, in order to protect the character of the single family neighborhoods, is we created more designations. We wanted to make sure that what is there now actually is able to stay there without new types of development coming in that would change the character of the neighborhood. So you can see here, we took the what was 2 to 4.5, and we actually we created a 2 to 6 because that's pretty similar to what's on the ground now. And then we took the 4.5 to 15, and we created a couple of different designations here. Now, I want to point out a couple of things here. One is that we're going to have a more refined list of sub-designations under these in the general plan. And that the other is that we added a neighborhood high designation at 30 to 45 housing units per acre. Now, this is actually a test to see if this is something that the community might want to see in different places in the city. So again, these are the draft designations. These aren't the final designations, and it's very possible that we may actually have nowhere where neighborhood high is identified in the community. And so I did want to point that out here. Then we have mixed use designations. Right now, and this again allows for vertical mix of uses or horizontal mix of uses. Right now, the city has a designation called commercial residential, which is its mixed use designation along Thousand Oaks Boulevard as part of the Thousand Oaks Boulevard specific plan. So we created a series of designations here based on comments that we heard from the public about exploring, not necessarily moving forward, but at least exploring the possibility of slightly higher density development in the community. So we have mixed use low at 20 to 30 units an acre, mixed use medium at 30 to 45, and 58 feet, and mixed use high at 45 to 60. And I want to point out the difference between mixed use low and mixed use medium, because it gets back to the point of of density and unit size. And in order to get a mixed use building, you can actually increase the density by from 30 to 45 units an acre without actually really increasing the height of the building, only slightly. And so that's what we did here between mixed use low and mixed use medium. And again, these are just testing ideas throughout that we can explore throughout the process to see what people's reactions are to that. The next category is commercial designations. These vary based on the FAR, so the intensity and the height, going from 0.5 FAR and 35 feet, which is more of a suburban character with single story buildings with surface parking, to what we call commercial town, up to 50 feet, which is about the same as the mixed use low, all the way to commercial regional, which is similar to some of the buildings that have been built in Rancho Conejo. There's also a series of industrial designations, which are really think of those as the job designations: industrial low, 1.0 FAR and 50 feet max, and then industrial flex 2.0 and 75 feet. Again, this is similar to the Amgen campus that you see here in the picture. And then there are institutional designations for public, quasi-public parks, open space, and utilities and flood control. And this is the majority of designations in the community. All right, I'm going to pause now. And now is actually the time. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and now it's the time for GPAC members to ask some questions. So if you all could put your videos back on, that would be appreciated. And then if you could raise your hands, we can call on you and see what questions you have so far about the process. Okay. Who wants to go first? Any hands raised? I don't see any yet. Simran and Ian, while we're waiting, do you guys want to, are there any more questions that you all want to bring up from the public? I know that there was a lot going on in the background.
Yes, we have a couple of questions again asking about if there are land uses proposed for the areas which are outside the areas of change, and you'll be covering that in the presentation momentarily. So folks just have patience for that. Another question is there are a few questions related to Measure E, and again, I think we'll be talking about that further later in the presentation, so we can wait to get answers at that point.
Good informed questions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to bring up? And then I see Rory has her hand up.
Sure. We had one particular question about, given the number of units that we need for low and very low income residents, and I think this is just a general statement. They're saying, will the city proactively identify parcels and subsidize the development for affordable projects? In terms of how the housing element will address the regional housing needs allocation, we will have to identify sites after there is a preferred land use alternative when it gets selected by council. And at that point in time, we would be selecting sites that would accommodate those low and very low housing needs for those particular parcels to demonstrate to the state that we can comply. And as far as subsidizing development, that's more of a program. Typically, cities will develop programs or policies that help incentivize potentially housing, but that's a work in progress as we move forward into the policy making for both the general plan and the housing element. So,
okay, great. Thank you, Ian. Rory, do you want to unmute?
Yes, I just wanted to ask if you've been considering, so if with the increase of population and units, say on the boulevard, that will require an additional public accessible park space for those residents and the citizens at large. So how does that fit into the general plan designation? So I think we need to make sure that we reserve out those kind of new park sites.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's as it seems like with everything the answer is technical, but you are so I apologize, but you're absolutely correct. I mean, just add population of the city, thinking about how do we add the things that people love in the city, such as parks and open space and other services. The city's regulations are going to require a certain amount of open space with every single development that comes forward. However, I'm losing my voice here. The city is not allowed to identify any new open space that is on private land. So the city can't say, you know what, if you want a parcel here, we think it's a great place for a park, and we're going to put a park designation on that. So the city is working, actively to think about parks and open spaces, and knows that as growth happens, parks need to be added to the city, but it's going to be more of an iterative process. Every single designation in the city will allow open space, but there's a question of where that goes relative to the new development that's happening. So the question, and not we can't really say in general plan it's going to be on this parcel or that parcel, unless that parcel is already owned by publicly owned parcel. Does that make sense?
You were breaking up quite a bit there, Matt.
Yeah, you were very garbled, so I'm not sure if it made sense or not.
Simran, can you take over on that answer? Can you guys hear me now again? Now you can? Okay. My phone's been buzzing, probably everyone telling me that they can't hear me. So the general plan cannot identify a specific space. No, again. Simran, go ahead and answer.
Yes, Rory, in terms of your question about whether the general plan can designate specific sites for certain types of uses, obviously the land use designations will designate sites for commercial, residential, mixed use, etc. But we cannot designate specific sites for open space or park space.
Okay, let's try this. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. Put in headphones. All right, are there any other questions from the GPAC? Okay, Mick, I see your hand
Nick.
up.
I can't figure out how to say raise hand with the Zoom thing. I'm missing the button for some reason, so I apologize. So one question I had was, if I remember you mentioned it probably early on in some of our sessions about the arena numbers. They are significantly higher than the last time that Thousand Oaks went through arena housing element update to accommodate the arena assessment. If I remember right, I thought I had heard that the numbers we currently have include a catch up from previous years. Is that the case, or what's really kind of the driving force of why it's so significantly different? And because there's mention of we have to kind of keep this accelerated view going for the next 2 cycles. If, can you give us an understanding of whether that's going to be the case? Just a little background for that would be helpful.
So I can give background, but I cannot predict the future. I try when I do planning. We all try to predict the future here. But the state in this round of the RHNA, the Regional Housing Needs Allocation, did have higher numbers because over the last 30 years, the state has not built enough housing in order to keep up with the population growth. The last time we were really in balance was in about 1980 compared to other states and other regions. And so since then, we have actually been on the decline where more people have been moving into the state than we've been building housing. And as a state, we're in a deficit of about 2.4 million housing units, which is pretty significant. And so this RHNA cycle was an attempt to begin to make up for that deficit because communities have said they don't want to grow. And so the state has said, look, if we're going to actually be successful, and if we're going to not have crazy high housing costs, and we're not going to lose our share of the market, we need to actually add more housing. And so that's the attempt to do the RHNA. Now, whether the state continues to use these numbers and have these higher numbers, we don't know. It may be that this is an anomaly, and it may be that this is the new normal. I have no indication. I don't know either way what that is. But I do want to go back to the point, which is this isn't just about the RHNA. This is about a long-term vision for the city and how the city can evolve over time to be the place that people want it to be. And so, what does that look like? And then how can you think about changes in the physical form of the city without significant modifications, but so that you can achieve other benefits? And so, the RHNA numbers are absolutely important. We have to think about those, but it's beyond that as well.
100%. Reason I ask is that there's references in the briefing book of we have to think 3 times what the current RHNA numbers are. So we should keep this in context of the full view of what we're thinking about.
Absolutely. Yep. It's a great point. Yeah, thanks. Let's see, Chase.
My question was about residential being near transit, because I know the state, there have been some proposed bills that will require that cities make housing be closer to public transit or more accessible and all that. And from what I can see on the maps, the areas where residents would want growth or accept growth are closer to where some of the public transit is. But what I want to know is how much that logic factors into these land use designations, because I do believe the state is going to eventually make some requirements about public transit being closer to housing, or more so housing being built closer to public transit. So how does transit factor into these land use designations?
That's a good question. So in the land use designations, it factors somewhat in that the more people that are in a concentrated area, the easier it is for transit to be successful. And so it factors in terms of the slightly higher densities for some of the land use designations as options. And then the areas that were identified by the GPAC and by the public are really also the areas that are probably the most viable for change because they're commercial areas. but they're also the areas that are most viable for transit. Transit is not really successful in low density areas. You need like a minimum of 15 units an acre, if not higher, in order to support even the most minimal level of transit. And so it is something to think about. And as you'll see with the alternatives, they do perform better from a transportation perspective, but we'll be getting to that. Okay, are there any other questions? Wyatt, I see your hand up.
Yeah, Matt,
And then
sorry,
Jennifer.
it's not giving me the raised hand option, but would you mind just digging into Rory's question a little bit more now that we can understand you?
About parks?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why we can't designate, make land use designations for that. The current general plan that we're operating under now has future park designations on it. So I'm just curious why we can't dig in.
So we can identify existing parks as parks, but what we are not allowed to do is to identify a private property as a park. And the reason is, if you own a parcel of land, say you own 5 acres of land in the city, and you were thinking about maybe housing there, and then you were designated as a park, you actually have no value. Yes, Paul, that's correct. Oh, you can't hear me now?
There's something about the parks question. Maybe I'll try again. So I'll carry on with the example Matt was posing. So if you own a 5-acre parcel and the city comes in and designates it as a park, you really you lose all monetary value of any potential development on that site, and it would be a taking. So unless the city purchased that property from that private property owner, the cities tend to not designate those properties as parks or open space, which take away all financial returns on that property.
Okay, we're going to try this again. Can you hear me? Now it's good again. Just start yelling if for some reason it starts happening again. It's one of those days, I guess. Okay, let's see, Jennifer, I saw your hand up.
And I magically have a button now. I wanted to ask, so much of this, we started this process almost 2 years ago now, right? And I remember the night we did that sort of mini charrette was February. So before the pandemic really
the world changed.
Shifted things, exactly. So I'm wondering, to what extent can we, should we, will we build in assumptions based on how things might shift post-pandemic in terms of retail space and office space into considerations for this plan?
Yeah, that's actually really an interesting question. And, I think we are thinking about that. There's a couple of things that we know and things we don't know at this point. And so, plans are, and again, no?
Matt, sorry. You might turn your video off.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, let's try this. There are things that we know and things that we don't know about what's going on from the pandemic. We know that retail and the types of retail spaces is probably going to forever change. There's lots of businesses that are smaller businesses that are going out of business, and in an area like Thousand Oaks, where some of these businesses there's already too much retail. We know that some of those retailers are not coming back, and we have to think about what are other uses. In terms of office space, I think the verdict is still out about whether people are going to need office space or not. What we have seen is that development projects for office are still moving forward pretty quickly. And that's not just in Thousand Oaks, it's actually all across the state. Again, we were we had too little office space before, and now I think we're trying to, it's going to help right the ship with that. I think there's a little bit of an overreaction that we've seen happening where companies are saying, we don't even need office space anymore. But I think that actually that what we're going to find is a correction where some of those businesses are actually saying, you know what, we do need office space. And even though we thought we didn't, because there's a need for people to collaborate. So I don't think the office market is dead. I just think I think we don't know with that yet. but we certainly need more housing moving forward in the state. Even though people are moving out, there's a little bit of an out migration. We still need to plan for more housing. But it's a great
Matt,
future thought question.
Matt, there are a few more follow-ups on Rory's questions about parks. And in addition to the response about not designating private property as parks, the other aspect of the response is that any new multifamily residential development will have open space requirements, so that there's both private open space provided for the individual units as well as common open space that the residents within that development have access to. So that will be a part of the land use designation and the development standards that accompany it.
Okay, thanks, Simran. All right, I think we should go back to starting to walk through the land use alternatives. Simran, if you could have the presentation open on your computer, that way, if my video, my sound goes out again, you can take over. Thank you, Simran. And let me go back to sharing my screen. Okay. You see the QA on the screen. Yes. Okay. Good. All right. So now let's move into the alternatives. I apologize. I'm going to keep my video off here. Hopefully that will be better. So now we have the question of what are land use alternatives? What is this process we're actually doing, and why does it matter? So land use alternatives are a way of expressing a long-term vision for the city into the future. They're an opportunity to test values and ideas from the community process. And this moves into the next phase of the process where we have to identify a preferred direction. They are a basis for continued discussion, which leads to that preferred alternative. And just thinking forward, the preferred alternative is probably likely to be a combination of the alternatives that you're presenting, that we're presenting today. So we are going to present ideas, and these are just different ways that the city could potentially evolve in the future. And it is a way for us to start a dialogue and a discourse about the future of the city. So again, it's an opportunity for discussion, and it's not that any one of these is necessarily going to move forward in its current pattern now. Okay. So some of the common themes that are informing all of the alternatives, and this is why the beginning of, am I still breaking up here? Yep.
Yeah. Matt, did you want to turn your Wi-Fi off on your phone?
I'm plugged into my computer. Maybe I will call in. Simran, are there more questions that can be answered while I dial in?
Sure, yeah, we can do that.
Okay, let's do that.
There's a question asking if we can't start, why that the writer is asking, I guess I'm wondering if you can't start going higher in terms of buildings and structures and thereby reducing the new lands needed to be developed. The alternatives explore that option. So, as we walk through the alternatives, as we're just getting started on, we'll see the alternatives have different organization of areas where you go higher in some areas and stay low in others, or spread out the height across larger, more of the change areas as Matt was beginning to describe. So that's something to keep in mind and respond to in the survey that accompanies the alternative. Let's see. Another question is, reducing BMT is becoming a significant measure of land use planning. are any land use future scenarios being envisioned that will reduce VMT. VMT, as you all know, stands for vehicle miles traveled per day per resident. And yes, that's a metric that the EIR will look at, and we have analyzed these alternatives that we are presenting today to see what the impacts on VMT are based on the changes in the land use patterns that the three alternatives are envisioning. And all three alternatives reduce VMT compared to the current general plan scenarios. There's another question about what will ultimately be presented to City Council. Right now, we are presenting the land use alternatives to the GPAC and the community. Over the next month or so, there's a survey that will be available to the residents to give their responses to and their opinion on the three alternatives. We also have 4 open houses or office hour sessions over the next month where folks can drop in and ask additional questions they have on the alternatives. We'll be collecting the responses to the survey, which will be open through the month of February, collect those responses, analyze those, and bring those back to the GPAC and the public for their review. And those will be presented to the Planning Commission and the City Council later in April.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Yay.
I have a question I can provide an answer to if we have time.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ian.
So there were several questions in regards to state mandates in terms of, housing law and so forth, and the concerns about how they're dictating how we go about planning for housing. And, one of the questions was, have the previous general plans been developed under these state mandates, or were they locally driven? Well, it's a combination of both, really. And we're going through this general plan update process, and we're looking at all elements of the general plan. However, the housing element does have a requirement to be updated every 8 years. And there are actual repercussions of not having a certified housing element for each of those 8-year cycles. Part of that is if we do not have compliant housing element, we would not be able to get grant funding for a variety of programs that the city offers, whether it's CDBG, home grants, also transportation funds, and the like. So, a lot of those and quite a few capital projects may be reliant on some of those grant funds as well. So what you see being done as far as improvements in the community, may not actually happen if those grants are cut off due to having an uncertified housing element. And then, so on top of that, what is the penalty for violating SB 330? So more recent housing legislation does put financial penalties on the city itself if you are not complying. SB 330, as Matt explained, and we'll go into further, is the no net loss. So basically you cannot redesignate a land at a lesser density without being able to accommodate somewhere else. And then also in terms of how projects are being implemented. Any case.
Okay, Ian, I am back. Hopefully, thank you. Those were really good answers and really good questions that you all are asking. So thank you for those. Now the common themes from the alternatives that you're going to hear about. So one, as was just mentioned by Ian, is that there's because of SB 330, there can be no decrease in the residential capacity, and because of Measure E, there can be no increase in the residential capacity. So all of the alternatives are designed to actually meet both of those requirements. So overall, in sum, they all have the same amount of full build out in the city. So really, it's a question of what is that pattern that you want. The second is that we matched land use designations to the density of existing neighborhoods. So all of the areas that are already built out with single family neighborhoods, we matched the density in those areas for what is there now, so that we didn't actually come up with a situation where someone could actually build a townhouse in the middle of a single family neighborhood, or a small apartment building in the middle of a single family neighborhood. And so what we did was we essentially moved that unbuilt capacity from the residential areas to those areas of change in order to make sure that we dealt with that no net loss. Now we have our third live poll. Melissa, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I'm going to pull up our third poll. I'm going to launch this now and then walk through the two questions that are included in this poll. You should see this on your screen in a minute. The first question asks, the existing general plan allows for townhomes and small apartments to be built in some single family areas. The proposed alternatives would reallocate this unbuilt residential capacity into the areas of change, excuse me. Do you agree with this approach? Answers are no, continue to allow townhomes and small apartments in medium density areas, or yes, lower the density and transfer the capacity to the areas of change, or a combination of the above, or don't know. If you continue scrolling down, there's a second question that asks, what is your top choice for where housing should be added? These are our areas of change. Your options are in Rancho Conejo, at the Oaks Mall or Jan's Marketplace, near downtown, on the eastern end of Thousand Oaks Boulevard, around Westlake Village Shopping Center, in shopping centers throughout the city, or no preference. And we'll pause here for a few seconds while folks respond to these two questions.
Okay, and as of now, only about 30% of people have voted. So if everyone could keep voting, I know it's a little bit more complex than asking if you live in the city. So it takes a little bit more thought. Okay, we're about halfway at this point.
There's some folks
Cameron?
saying they can't see the poll. I'm not sure why.
And
Scroll
just to
down.
let folks, yeah, if you scroll down on the poll, you can see the second question. And just to let folks know, these are questions that are also on the survey. So again, we're doing a sort of a straw poll this evening for conversation, but we also it also is in the survey. So there's an opportunity for all of you to provide those answers as well. All right, about 70, almost 75% of you have now voted. And Melissa, let's go ahead and end the poll.
All right.
And share the results.
Share the results.
Okay, great. So the first is that existing, in terms of the first question about should we continue to allow townhomes and small apartments in single family areas. And the results were somewhat mixed on this one. 36% said yes, lower the density and transfer the capacity to areas of change. About equal numbers said no, allow townhomes and apartments to stay to be built in those medium density areas. And then 28% said a combination of the above. So I guess that means that you think that some areas should allow for a transfer of development, and some should allow for more townhomes and small apartments to be built. In terms of the top choice for where housing should be located, at the Oaks Mall and Jan's Marketplace was the top vote getter. The second was shopping centers throughout the city. And then third was near downtown. A small percentage of you had no preference. Very small percentage said around Westlake Village Shopping Center and then Rancho Conejo. And these are some important questions because the alternatives that we're going to show you are going to show you different areas where these different uses can be built, but this, where housing can be built, but this is actually a really helpful guidance to think about, and will be helpful for us as we move forward to start to think about a preferred alternative. Okay, so let's stop sharing the results and let's keep moving on in the presentation. So now we're going to get into the alternatives, and I'll try and go through these as quickly as I can. We're going to have a couple of points that we are going to pause for to ask some questions, and then a couple more live polls to gain your insight into the direction. So the flow of what I'm going to talk about is first the areas of stability. Next is a review of the city, a very high-level review of the citywide alternatives and the themes across each of those three alternatives, because each alternative had a theme. And then the comparison of the alternatives of each of those three alternatives for the 5 focus areas, and then finally an analysis of the alternatives. So let's start with the areas of stability. So as I mentioned, so what we have here is, you see the map of the city. The area that is gray, that is grayed out, is the 8% that is what we're calling the areas of change. And really, it's more apt to call these the areas of potential change, because we don't yet know whether there will be changes. The area that has a hatch mark to it are areas that are part of the county. They are county land that is surrounded by the city. So they're called county islands. And then what you see is the green is the parks, golf courses, and open space. And then the yellow is different varying densities of residential development. And so all of the alternatives have the same areas of stability. So the areas outside of the areas of change. We went through the process of matching the existing density in these residential areas to what is built on the ground. All parks and open space are preserved and designated as parks and open space. Schools, religious institutions, CLU, hospitals, medical facilities are identified as institutional. And again, what we wanted you to do was really to focus on the areas of change and differences with the areas of change for right now, and all of the areas of stability are the same between the alternatives. Okay, so now let's jump into the 3 different alternatives. So this is alternative 1, and I want to point out a couple of the different areas and what we're really going to be referring to as these different areas. So the first is Rancho Conejo, and the second is what we are calling Moore Park Road and East Thousand Oaks Boulevard, and that's around where the Oaks Mall is and Jan's Marketplace, and near where Torrential Hill is. The next section is called Downtown and Thousand Oaks Boulevard. And this is in the middle here, the middle part of Thousand Oaks Boulevard. And then we have the fourth, which is the Westlake and East End. And then the 5th area is all of the various commercial centers that you see throughout the city. So alternative 1, the idea behind this alternative is to create a limited number of higher density areas in strategic locations throughout the city, and then keep other areas as lower density development. So it's really trying to focus the development on those limited areas in order to create pockets of activity throughout the city. And so the areas where it is focused in alternative 1 is adjacent to Rancho Conejo, and then on the south side of 101 in the Oaks Mall area and Jan's Marketplace, in the area around where the 299 project and Tarantula Hill Brewery are, in the downtown area, and then around Westlake Boulevard and Westlake and Thousand Oaks Boulevard. So that, and we'll go through the details of those alternatives in just a minute for each of those areas. Alternative 2 is a little bit more of an even spread of development intensity throughout the city. And so you can see that what we're doing here over in Rancho Conejo is that the mixed use is located in a different area just on the outskirts. But you see more purple on this map, and purple is the color for the mixed use. So the varying shades of purple represent the intensity of mixed use development. And so the theme of this alternative is really to try and spread the development out into different, throughout the areas of change rather than focusing it in a few locations. The third concept here with alternative 3 is really a very strong jobs focus. Rancho Conejo is maintained all as jobs, but the intensity of development is increased in this area. The area across from the Oaks Mall could be industrial uses or office uses. It's industrial isn't really the right way of thinking about it. It's really different scales of office and employment uses. So that would sort of be a central hub of activity. And then the third is strengthening on the east side of the city, strengthening the existing development pattern of office and light industrial uses on the east side of the city. In order to make up for that, there would be a series of higher density pockets here on the south side of 101 and Rancho Conejo, again around Jan's Marketplace and on Moore Park Road, and then at the Westlake Thousand Oaks Boulevard intersection would be a third node. So as you can see, what we were trying to do across these was not that any one would necessarily be the one that's selected, but we're trying to test different ideas to see what people like and what people don't like. And this is all based on comments that we had heard throughout the engagement process. And so we're trying to test out those ideas again to gauge the level of acceptance for some of these different ideas. Okay, now I am going to shift and start going into some of the sub areas so you can see some of the details and the differences between those sub areas. Let's start with alternative 1 in Rancho Conejo. So this is what you're going to see for all of the different sub area alternatives, where it's a close-up, a zoomed-in map of the area, and I'll try and point out some features. And the colors on the map refer to the key on the bottom for what the proposed land use designation is, and then the maximum intensity of development, the maximum building you could really have there, or the vision for that area. So a couple of things to point out here with alternative 1 for Rancho Conejo is, first is that you see there's the area adjacent of purple, which is mixed use. The vision here is that this is a really intense job center and a center, an area that could expand and is expanding in terms of the number of jobs there. And there's been a movement in other parts of the state and other parts of the country to make those areas slightly more urban and more walkable, and also have a mix of uses, residential and retail uses in close proximity. Areas like where Google's headquarters are and Moffett Park are taking that approach, and the biotech area in South San Francisco up north are also taking that approach of adding a diversity of uses, allowing a limited amount of residential and retail uses to come into those areas to create more of a mixed use district. You can see the darker gray is what's called industrial flex, which is the higher scale of the employment uses, and those are expanded. The dot here points to the Amgen campus. At the intersection of Ventu is an area where there could be a hotel and commercial uses, and the red color is commercial regional, which allows for buildings such as this Hyatt Place Hotel. Not that there's a Hyatt Place proposed there, but this is just a representative photograph. And then the vacant parcel here south of 101 could be developed with a mix of retail and residential uses, perhaps having a little town square, or having standalone residential with some mixed use, vertical mixed use development. Alternative 2 you can see that the pattern has changed here for some of the areas. However, much of the area actually really remains the same. So alternative 2, there's more areas which are darker gray, which is the industrial flex area, and some of the lighter gray, which would be more 1 to 2 story office uses. The area along the freeway, the red along the freeway, could remain commercial uses, and you'll see that theme pretty consistent across a lot of the alternatives. The vacant parcel here south of 101 in this alternative is the mixed use low, so a slightly lower scale compared to alternative 1, and more mixed use on the south side of the freeway. And so this alternative sort of moves the mixed use to the outskirts of Rancho Conejo, the Rancho Conejo business area, and then expands the amount of mixed use south of the freeway while also maintaining commercial uses. Alternative 3 is really the jobs-focused alternative. And in this alternative, all of the area really north of the freeway, north of 101, is for job uses. And so there isn't any mixed use here, and there's just a variety of scales and types of commercial uses, commercial and office and non-residential uses. There's an expansion of the darker gray, which is in the industrial flex, with a core area of the lower scale industrial low. There's a potential for intensification of commercial uses in the red here, adjacent to Rancho Conejo, which could be hotels, as you see in this photograph on the far left side of the image. There could be more freeway commercial uses along Ventu, and then on the south side of the freeway, there's an expansion of the of mixed-use development with the vacant parcel at mixed-use medium, again, which could allow either vertical mixed use or could allow for a mix of horizontal uses where there's some residential and some commercial that's separated from each other. Okay, now it's time for the next live poll, now that we've gone through that. Melissa, can you go ahead and launch that?
Yes. So we're going to launch the fourth poll. This has one question, and it asks, do you think that mixed-use development should be allowed in or immediately adjacent to Rancho Conejo? Your options are yes, add a mixed-use district for employees to live near where they work, no, maintain the area for jobs only, or not sure.
And just to point out that alternative 1, again, shows that some of the area, which is currently right now for just jobs and doesn't allow residential, could allow some residential, as well as a limited amount south of the 101 freeway. Alternative 2 maintains a strong jobs focus, but converts some of the commercial areas into to allow residential. So the Lowe's or the Home Depot could actually stay, and some multifamily housing could be added on the edge, and we've seen that happen in a number of places. And then the last is really just having mixed use really only on the south side of 101, but not on the north side.
If you haven't already, please submit your response to this poll question. We have about 72% of folks who've already voted. We'll wait just for a few more seconds and then share the results with everyone.
Okay, we're at about 78%, which is about what we had. Oh, going up a little higher. All right, let's close the polls. Still going. And let's close this.
All right.
Okay, so overwhelmingly, about 80% of you said that you think that there should be a mixed-use district for employees to live near where they work. That's interesting. It's also it's interesting in that when we asked the previous question that said, do you think where do you think it should be prioritized? It shouldn't be prioritized in Rancho Conejo, but you think it should happen there. So that's interesting. Not a top priority to target, but there should be some at least according to those of you who are participating tonight, there could be some mixed use residential areas near Rancho Conejo. Okay, thank you. Let's move on to our next area, which we are calling the Moore Park Road and West Thousand Oaks Boulevard. You all should really recognize this area here. This has the Oaks Mall in it. It has Jan's Marketplace. The road that you see sort of moving vertically right through the center is Moore Park Road, and then the bottom right is Thousand Oaks Boulevard with Hillcrest moving through the center of the area. So in alternative one, the idea here, again, this is the alternative where we tried to create nodes and focus nodes of activity in different areas. So both Jan's Marketplace as well as the Oaks Mall would be designated as mixed use, with the Oaks Mall area having the higher intensity uses. This would be a combination of mixed use high and mixed use medium. It would allow for potentially a Main Street retail shopping center, Main Street retail kind of walkable area, and multifamily housing of upwards of 5 stories. An example is here in the upper left-hand photograph. There's been a variety of mixed-use projects built with ground floor retail, common public open space, and then a vertical mix of residential uses above that. Along in the Jan's Marketplace, it could have a somewhat similar character, but would allow horizontal or vertical mixed use with densities of 20 to 30 units an acre, and then some ground floor or standalone retail uses. In the area along Thousand Oaks Boulevard here, you can see a higher density, the darker purple, of mixed use medium around where the Tarantula Hill Brewery is, and then moving to the east could be mixed use along Thousand Oaks Boulevard. There's also a good amount of commercial use in this alternative, and you can see that this use identifies the areas along the 101 freeway to just west of Moore Park Road as commercial. There's some ideas that it's better to have commercial uses along the freeway rather than residential because of air quality issues. And then while Jan's Marketplace could be mixed use, the east side of Moore Park Road would all remain as commercial uses, with neighborhood medium in the neighborhoods behind. Neighborhood medium allows for 10 to 20 dwelling units per acre, which would be townhomes and small scale apartments. Alternative 2 shifts the focus of where the mixed use development is and actually adds more mixed use development compared to alternative 1. So the Oaks Mall would all be mixed use low, which would be 20 to 30 dwelling units per acre and up to 50 feet. Whereas in this alternative, Jan's Marketplace would go to mixed use medium, so 30 to 45 units an acre and up to 58 feet. So only slightly taller, but an increase in development. This alternative along Moore Park Road allows more mixed use development in order to allow some of the commercial centers to potentially transition from their current low scale commercial use to add some residential development. And then the area along Thousand Oaks Boulevard would remain as mixed use low, which is essentially the current designation of the area right now in the Thousand Oaks Boulevard specific plan. The area around the interchange of the freeway and Moore Park would be the commercial neighborhood, which would allow a variety of commercial uses, mostly at a lower scale. The third conceptual idea, and this is the one that, again, focuses more on jobs, the third alternative. But in doing so, it adds more higher intensity development, more mixed use high development in concentrated pockets. So what we have here is that the Oaks Mall would be split between continuing commercial uses, which could allow walkable retail, but could also allow offices. The area to the north of Hillcrest is industrial flex, which would allow more intense office uses that are potentially there now. At the very end is mixed use, the very end where the Oaks Mall is mixed use medium, residential medium, which allows townhome type development. And we call this the thumb because of its shape. And so the thumb here, the thumbnail would essentially be residential. Then there are two pockets of mixed use high. The first one along Thousand Oaks Boulevard, and then the second one in Jan's Marketplace. And these would allow for up to 60 units an acre and up to 5 to 6 stories. And then moving east is continuing low, mixed use low along Thousand Oaks Boulevard, and then mixed use along the majority of Moore Park Road, with a slight increase in the intensity of development in the residential neighborhoods to go to neighborhood medium high, which is 20 to 30 units an acre, and potentially up to 50 feet in height. And you see an example here in the upper right-hand corner. Okay, let's go to live poll number 5. And I'm sure that all of you on the GPAC and all of you on the public have lots of questions and lots of ideas that we're going to be able to explore over the next month. Melissa, can you go ahead and launch?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So we're going to launch the 5th poll, which includes 2 questions. The first question is, what best describes your vision for the future of the Oaks Mall? And the options are: leave it as a regional mall, maintain some retail but allow townhomes and 2 to 3 story multifamily residential, develop with Main Street retail and 3 to 4 story mixed use, develop with Main Street retail and 5 to 6 story mixed use. If you scroll down, the second question asks, what best describes your vision for the future of Jan's Marketplace? And the options are similar: leave as a regional mall, maintain some retail but allow townhomes and 2 to 3 story multifamily residential, develop with Main Street retail 3 to 4 stories, develop Main Street retail with 5 to 6 stories.
As folks are answering that question, Matt, I just wanted to interject. Those watching on YouTube cannot participate in the polls, in case they're wondering.
Right. The polls are open to both the members of our GPAC as well as the folks from the public who are live in the Zoom meeting with us now.
Okay, so we'll give this about 15 more seconds. Again, this alternative explores different intensities and locations of mixed-use development and different concentrations of commercial development throughout this area. So we are at about 80% voted. We'll give it about 10 seconds and then we'll close the polls. Okay, let's go ahead and close. All right, so thank you all for doing that. Again, these questions that we're asking are sort of verbal manifestations of some of the concepts that we were testing in the alternatives. So it's helpful for us to have them both as what do you like about the map, but also what does it actually mean in words. And so as we can see here with the first question about the Oaks Mall, it was actually pretty close between maintain some retail but allow townhomes, and then also redevelop with a Main Street and 3 to 4 story mixed use. The one with the least number of votes was leave it as a regional mall, and about 25% said do a Main Street and 5 to 6 stories. If we look at think about the Jan's Marketplace, what's interesting to me about these results, again, it's the same, maintain some retail but allow townhomes and 2 to 3 stories. That one actually, maybe because of its proximity and visibility, I'm speculating here, but potentially there was a slight leaning towards the lower intensity in terms of 38% picked that compared to 32, and then the number of people who said redevelop with Main Street in 5 to 6 stories went down. And so there's more aptitude for slightly higher density development in the Oaks Mall than Jan's Marketplace. And it sounds like there's some general acceptance overall for a change in use and allowing some residential uses in these areas. The question really becomes what type of residential uses and at what scale. And that's really good information for us to get as we move forward. Okay, let's keep moving here into our last 3 areas. And so the next area is the downtown and Thousand Oaks Boulevard. The first alternative, and this runs from essentially the 23 freeway east. The big blue area kind of right in the middle on Thousand Oaks Boulevard is the Civic Arts Plaza. And what this alternative did is to create, again, based on the maps that we saw for where people wanted to see more mixed use development, this area from Herbs Road to the east is really the downtown area, this downtown core, and people wanted to see more mixed use there. And so this alternative moves that mixed use to higher intensity, so to mixed use high, maintains mixed use development, mixed use low throughout the rest of the corridor. And then what you see in the sort of yellow and orange areas is mostly trying to match what is on the ground or allowed today through the current general plan and current zoning. So again, the change here is really just allowing a sort of slight increase actually an increase in mixed use development in the downtown area from mixed use low, which it is now, to mixed use high. And then also around Rancho Road, this area, in really all of the alternatives, Rancho Road and Thousand Oaks Boulevard was really identified as commercial because that is pretty much the pattern that we believe it will probably stay on into the future. Alternative 2 is as I had mentioned overall, is more of a spreading of the mixed use. So instead of having one more intense mixed use center, this spreads the mixed use and allows mixed use development at 30 to 45 units per acre along Thousand Oaks Boulevard. So an increase in intensity, but only an 8-foot increase in height. Around Rancho Road, it would be slightly lower and then down over into the commercial areas. All of the alternatives continue with the vision of the Civic Arts Plaza and rethinking the Civic Arts Plaza as part of a more vibrant downtown meeting place for the city, which was in the plan developed a couple of years ago. So all of them take that into consideration of having kind of really vibrant open space and vibrant activity with retail, arts, and entertainment in that area. And as you can see in the neighborhoods, there's the orange color, which is the neighborhood medium at 10 to 20 dwelling units per acre, and that would accommodate row houses or two or maybe 3-story multifamily housing. The third alternative, my mouse is going crazy here. The third alternative, even though this is really the jobs focus, this is an area, a part of the city, a part of the areas of change where it would really maintain a mixed use focus. There'd be a slight intensity, increase in intensity in the commercial development around Rancho Road, and then a combination of mixed use low, 20 to 30 units an acre, and mixed use medium along Thousand Oaks Boulevard. And then a continuation of the current, the current pattern of housing adjacent to and on either side of Thousand Oaks Boulevard. This area or this alternative would identify a small number of parcels really adjacent to Thousand Oaks Boulevard and the mixed use as mixed use medium high, which would be 20 to 30 units an acre. And you can see this building here in the upper right-hand corner of maybe a 3-story residential building is what you might expect to see in that area. And that would be adding multifamily housing and adding the number of people who are living within walking distance of this new mixed use and vibrant commercial area in the downtown. Okay, live poll number 6, Melissa.
Yes. So we're launching the 6th poll. It's one question, rather short. Should multifamily residential development be allowed on Thousand Oaks Boulevard? And your options are yes, no, or not sure.
And just a reminder that a lot of Thousand Oaks Boulevard right now allows for commercial and residential. That's the designation. So it is allowed on a large portion of Thousand Oaks Boulevard. And the question is, should that continue? Yes, no, or not sure.
If you haven't already, please submit your response. We'll just wait for a few more seconds and then share the results with everyone.
Okay, let's go ahead and end the polling. So more than 3/4 of those of you who responded said that yes, there should be multifamily residential development allowed on Thousand Oaks Boulevard. 15% said no, and almost 10% were not sure about that. Not sure about the direction at this point. And again, the alternatives will, and the survey will allow you to dig deeper into this question and answer it again for official results. Okay, so let's move into the 4th area, which is the Westlake and East End area. And here you can see Westlake Boulevard and the Ventura Freeway, the 101 freeway going right through the middle. And then this is the east end of Thousand Oaks Boulevard. In this alternative, the concept is to extend the mixed use down Thousand Oaks Boulevard. You can see the sort of the commercial area here, the commercial neighborhood is actually where the auto dealers are. So in all of the alternatives, these remain. The auto dealers are a source of a lot of revenue for the city, and so the alternatives don't mess with that source of revenue. Moving into the future, there are other areas for potential change in the city that would not impact the finances in the same way and would have positive impacts. So on the north side across from that is mixed use low. This alternative identifies a mixed use high node right around the intersection of Westlake Boulevard and Thousand Oaks Boulevard, and expands mixed use to mixed use low to the east with a large parcel over here, which is currently used as office space. To make up for that, if you keep moving east, is industrial flex, so it would allow for more intensification, more intense job uses up to 75 feet. On the south side of the freeway, this area, which we call the Towns Gate area, for the road that's Towns Gate going right through it, is the current job, employment, industrial area. This would really remain as it is today. The parcel in the upper left is the Kmart parcel. This is identified here as mixed use medium, which is the 30 to 45 units an acre and up to 58 feet, that it could have either vertical or horizontal mixed use. And then in this alternative, the Westlake Plaza Shopping Center is identified as mixed use. This is an area when we asked where's your priority for where new housing should go, this was probably the lowest on the list of all of the areas. So, it's certainly something to think about as we're moving forward into the alternatives. Alternative 2 is expands the amount of commercial, the commercial regional space, which is the red, as well as taking to make up for that, taking some of the area that is currently industrial in the Towns Gate area south of the freeway, and allowing for mixed use development there to maybe have a band of residential, mixed use residential development in the Westlake area. So as you can see here on the north side of 101 Freeway, there's a lot of the commercial at different scales, but then a mixed use medium across from the auto dealers, and that would be up to 58 feet and 4 to 5 stories in that area. So really the big move here and some of the big questions to ask are, should this Townsgate area continue as a job-focused area, or should some residential be allowed in this area? And the light purple you see here is the mixed use low at 20 to 30 units an acre. Alternative 3 is really the strong, as I mentioned before, sort of the strong jobs focused area. So here there's much less mixed use development potential in this area, much less residential development. It would maintain jobs in the Townsgate area and actually along the freeway allow for some intensification of the jobs. At the east end of Thousand Oaks Boulevard, the dark gray here would be industrial flex to make up for that and to create really a node of activity and mixed use activity at the intersection of Westlake and Thousand Oaks Boulevard. Could be sort of a mixed use center that could serve as a central meeting place for folks on this end of town. And so all 4 corners would have mixed use. It would continue the auto center, but maintain some of the commercial uses on the north side of Thousand Oaks Boulevard. And then on the southwest side of Westlake Boulevard, south of the Ventura Freeway, this entire area would really remain as commercial uses without allowing residential and mixed use to come in, except for the current little orange parcel you see here in the corner, which is an existing multifamily, I believe, senior housing or senior care facility. Okay, so let's do live poll number 7.
We are launching the 7th poll. This asks one question: what best describes your vision for the Townsgate Road area? The options are keep as is, increase development potential and employment opportunities in the area, or allow a portion to convert to mixed use. We'll pause here while everyone submits their responses, and then we'll share the results.
We are almost ready to move into the final Q&A and next steps phase. Okay, why don't we go ahead and close the poll here?
Sure.
Okay. About 60% said allow a portion to convert to mixed use, and so we can explore that one in the alternatives. Only 16% keep as is, and about a quarter said allow for more potential employment uses in the area. Okay, great, thank you. And now we're off into our last area here, and that is the village centers. So what during the process, when we asked community members and the GPAC, we asked you all to identify potential locations. Quite a number of you said that you really wanted to think about what could happen at those shopping centers throughout the city to make sure that there was more vibrancy within walking distance of more residents in the city. And so the idea was born to potentially think about what could happen to those areas and whether they should remain as commercial uses now and maybe just have a different format to those uses, maybe something that was more conducive to meeting and gathering, or whether they would benefit because of the changes in retail, whether they would benefit from allowing some multifamily housing, either as in standalone residential or in a mixed use format, either horizontal or vertical. And so we came up with 3 three concepts for this. This was a little bit simpler than the other ones. The first one is to allow a combination of mixed-use low and commercial neighborhood. And so depending on where and depending on the situation, we identified for each of these 7 areas that you see identified here and numbered in the map, we said that some parcels could be mixed use, some could be multifamily, and some could be residential. So it's sort of a refined and more mix and match approach. Alternative 2, we said, you know what, this alternative is just leave them as all commercial. Think about maybe incentives to try and change the format so that they're all sort of more similar to these images here, or more conducive to gathering rather than just going and picking up groceries and leaving. And then the third is that they would all be designated as mixed use low, which is 3 to 4 stories of residential over retail. And here's some examples you see of some of the photographs in the bottom. Now let's get into the comparison of the alternatives. We don't have a poll for that one, but let's get into some of the comparison of the alternatives. So we took the alternatives in their entirety, both the areas of change as well as the areas of stability, and used a computer modeling software called Urban Footprint to do some analytics and try and see how each of them performed. And so we're going to show you results of that, and we want you to think about these as sort of relative of one to the other, not necessarily as absolute numbers. And so this is the comparison across the 3 alternatives for a subset of the land use designations. Again, a lot of the residential designations, the neighborhood low, was actually really consistent across all of them, as well as the public. And so what we tried to do here is to focus the alternatives and just focus the information so you could see where some of these differences were. And I just want to point out a few things that are reflected in what I said that show up in this table. And so when you look at mixed use high, which is the 45 to 60 units per acre, we tried to use that one clearly more sparingly than all of the others, because we know the concern in the community about density. And you can see here that alternative 2 really doesn't even have any of the mixed use high. This is the one that spreads the mixed use at lower scale throughout the city. There's a little bit in alternative 1, and then there's more in alternative 3, which has a stronger jobs focus. And you can see that stronger jobs focus here in the more intense jobs with the industrial flex in alternative 3, where 664 acres, or 2.1% of the total land area in the city is industrial flex, compared to the other 2 alternatives, which have 1.4% and only slight differences. Overall, the mixed use amount of mixed use development really hovered around between 1.9 and about 2.3% of the total area of the city. And then you can see the neighborhood high, which is the new neighborhood designation, which is the 30 to 45 units to the acre. And it really isn't applied very much in the city in the alternatives and how we did it, where alternative 1, there isn't any. Alternative 2, there's just a really small pocket. And then alternative 3, there's about 63 acres, but that's only 0.2% of the total area. But then you can see how the neighborhood medium varies across slight differences, again, with alternative 2 being slightly higher. We then used the analytical tools in the model, and we use these as percentages rather than absolute numbers to show what some of the outputs of the model were. As you can see, we have alternatives 1, 2, and 3, and we compared that to the 1970 general plan. And so we also modeled that plan. The total number of housing units is the same in all of the alternatives. So they all have the same. They're all the same as the Measure E cap and the SB 330 number. The total number of jobs went up in all 3 alternatives, but 1 and 2 are pretty similar. And here you can see that, and this is job capacity, and a lot of that is happening through an increase in FAR, not necessarily an increase in the total area of land. And you can see here that that alternative 3 is greater than alternatives 1 and 2, reflecting the job focus. All of the alternatives perform better in terms of these other metrics of vehicle miles traveled, GHG emissions, access to retail, access to transit, and then mode share. Let me just go through a couple of these. So the vehicle miles traveled, which is the new metric that the state uses for performance of projects in the environmental review process called CEQA, they're all less, 15 to 17% than the existing general plan. They all help to address the city's GHG emissions, desire to reduce GHG emissions. They all increase the amount of retail and transit within a 5-minute walk. And Chase, this goes back to your question about transit. So they're all much better than the existing general plan, but there's slight variations between the alternatives for what those differences are. And they all increase the walking and biking mode share. And again, all of this is happening because it's bringing, it's concentrating development in a smaller area of the city. It's allowing more people to walk and bike, which reduces the amount of vehicle miles traveled, which brings retail close together and allows people to take transit, and that in turn reduces the amount of GHG emissions. So that's why we're seeing all of that change there. We're almost done here. So keep in mind a few things as you're going through these alternatives. The first is that these areas of change are less than 8% of the city's total land area. So, and that even in those areas of change, there's a lot that's really not changing in terms of the uses themselves, as you saw from the residential land on either side of Thousand Oaks Boulevard. The second is that mixed use accounts for 1.9 to 2.3% of the city's total land area, and that 86% of the land area is open space and single family residential. All of the alternatives perform better than the existing general plan. They reduce VMT and GHG emissions and increase mobility through transit, walking, and biking. And then all of the alternatives meet Measure E and SB 330. Finally, remember that a couple of things. One is that the general plan is really a long-term vision. We're really spending the time now thinking about what the city is going to be like in the future, and it may be that those of you who are here now may not necessarily be here in the future, and so we're thinking about what should the city be in the long term and for the next several generations. The general plan allows new development to happen, but it's not like development's going to happen overnight. Development is a very slow process, and so even some of the changes in land use may not result in changes for years and years to come if they ever happen at all. Before we get into the question and answer, I just want to discuss quickly how we want to get feedback on these alternatives. This was a lot of information this evening. We are going to open it up to some more questions, but let me just quickly discuss how we're going to get feedback. I showed this slide earlier. Tonight is listening and asking questions. Tonight is about understanding, responding to these poll questions. Then we really want you to review the briefing book. We know it's long. We know it's going to take time to go through and do this. We are going to have 4 times where we're going to have virtual office hours. This is going to allow us to dive deeper into the alternatives. These are going to be, just a time for you all to join a virtual meeting. And we, as the consultant team in the city, are going to be there to answer any questions that you have about the process and about the alternatives. We know, and we apologize that because there were so many of you this evening that people didn't get a chance to speak, but rest assured that over the next month there will be time through these office hours to share your ideas. And then ultimately we want you to complete the online survey. As you all know by now, we have a briefing book. It's about 75 pages long, and this is up on the city's website. It is going to link to a software called Conveo, and it's an interactive tool that allows people to both look through the book and then make comments. And so I just want to point out a couple of things here. You access this by going through the city's website and through the general plan website, toaks2045.org. and you'll be able to open up the briefing book. You can click on these links on the left side. You'll see these blue buttons on the left side. And one of the things that you can do is there's interactive maps here. So you click on the Earth icon, and then you can go to the map and you can identify, pick a layer. You see the different layers here, which is the second icon over. And then you can pick which layer you want and which alternative you want. And then you can put a marker on the map and write a note, and we will get those notes and be able to hear more specific thoughts about any parcels that could change. The survey is available on the website. It is one survey per person. If you have multiple people in your household, let us know, and we will make sure that you have an opportunity for each individual to take the survey. There's about 30 questions overall, and they provide their detailed questions on the different alternatives. And the survey will take about 30 to 60 minutes to do after you review the briefing book. And it's the survey that is the primary form of feedback on the alternatives. So we really want everyone to take it and to share their ideas. The survey is going to close in a month on March 1st because we need to move forward with the process of getting the plan moving to the City Council. So now I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and we are going to go and take just a couple of minutes to
sorry, Matt, can I interject really quick?
Answer. Yes.
Matt, can I interject
Kristen.
really quick? I just want to let everybody know so that there's no confusion. We have posted the land use alternatives page to the website. So if you go to the home page and if you click on the about at the top of the page, it's a brand new page called land use alternatives. So you can find all the information that Matt just mentioned on the website now. That's it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. And Kristen is Kristen and Michael are the brains behind this entire operation from the city side, and really keep the process going. All right, so I have if GPAC members could raise their hand. We have a couple of hands raised so far. We're going to do some GPAC questions and then some questions for the public, and then do a quick wrap up. Paul, you haven't had a chance to speak, just to tell me that you couldn't hear me. So go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. It's less of a question, more if you can help. I've been watching the comments all night. There's some great ones in there. Can you summarize what the general plan is and what it isn't, and how it relates to the city council, how it relates to existing property owners, developers? Like, what is the process that the general plan does or does not impact?
Okay, that is a great question. Let me just start by saying that there is information for those who really want to dive deeper into this. There is information on the project website about what the general plan does and doesn't do. The general plan is the long-term vision and policy document for the city. It is really the city's constitution, and so all decisions about development flow from the general plan and must be consistent with the general plan. So it's a very important document that we get this right now in the process, and that we have the conversations now about what the future of the city should be. We want to really do it now rather than on a project by project basis, which has certainly been happening in the city now. So the general plan, as you saw, has land use designations, and those are the potential future use of the property. Every single parcel in the city is identified as has a land use designation on it. And so that sets the limits of what a property owner can do with their property the uses and the intensity. The land use designations feed into zoning, and zoning is the dimensional requirements. It has like setbacks, more specifics on building heights, on open space, on parking. So the zoning needs to be consistent with the general plan, and it's the zoning where you go to for the details. So it all stems from the general plan, but there's a series of other documents and regulations that then implement the vision of the general plan. Paul, do you have any follow-up questions on that? You're muted.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Just to clarify that the general plan is not actually knocking down buildings and making these things happen. It's setting the template for somebody who may decide, who owns a building, whatever, to be able to do something based on how their land designation may change. I know people who are new to the general plan. I was new to it in the very beginning, especially when we get deep into these details. Tonight, you start to believe you're helping, design very specific things, when a lot of that is actually up to, property owners and things as time goes on.
Right. Yeah, Paul, you said that really well. Thank you. So yeah, the general plan sets the vision, but it's up to individual property owners in order to decide what to do with their property. And let me sort of give an example of how change sort of happens slowly and over time. The Thousand Oaks Boulevard specific plan has been around for a while. The entire stretch, actually, two of our sub areas that we talked about, two of the areas of change, are part of the Thousand Oaks Boulevard specific plan. They allow for mixed use development at 3 stories, 50 feet, 30 units an acre, but you can go higher than that for density if you have ground floor retail. We've only seen a couple of projects come forward in the last 10 years or so. So just because it's designated as something doesn't mean something is going to be built. And again, it's up to those individual property owners to make their financial decisions that they feel they need to make for their property. It just sets the parameters. Okay, Chase, you had your hand up as well. And then Fred after that for your question.
Yes, just first off, this is just like a little accessibility thing. I saw somebody in the Q&A say about deaf people and accessing these meetings. So I was wondering if there could be maybe an ASL interpreter on here for future meetings. But my question was about parking and how much it factors into these alternatives, because when we had a speaker, when doing the speaker series, there was one speaker who talked about how some cities have overbuilt with parking, and just way too much parking. And I was wondering how much that factors in, because I know here, some of the shopping centers, the parking goes unused. You see like lots of empty spaces and all of that. So what I'm asking is, did that logic factor into these alternatives, and how developers may be able to repurpose that parking into building housing and mixed use?
Yeah, so it did to a very limited degree, in that we did look at the city and in those areas, in the areas of change, and start to think about, are there areas that have more surface parking and maybe have more potential for development in the future. It does not factor in that the general plan doesn't specify specific requirements for how much parking there should be. That happens in the zoning code. The general plan can set policies about generally how parking functions related to the amount of development. So it can set incentives for making sure that there's either less parking or more parking at a policy level that then is implemented through the general plan, through the zoning code. Okay, Fred, quick question from you.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay. It's all about quality of life. I think we're all concerned about that. Specifically, if we have enough land to increase population, are we concerned about congestion? If we don't have a choice as far as the state mandating increased population via land use, are we going to defeat the quality of life that we already have? And just as Chase raised the parking issue, are we going to, by increasing the population on the Thousand Oaks Boulevard corridor, thus increasing the number of people that are going to frequent the businesses, but because of the lack of parking possibly, are we going to defeat the very purpose of having more people frequent these businesses by having the residents there that we allow to live there, but by the same token, having the other residents of Thousand Oaks who will not go down there because the lack of parking, because it is so congested, and thus decreasing the quality of life. So again, I don't want to complain without raising an answer, a solution. my solution basically is do not have residences taller than 3 stories and always allow enough parking so that there's a win-win. The residents who live there can just walk there, but then by the same token, visitors to the city and the local residents who live outside of the Thousand Oaks Boulevard corridor can frequent the businesses there because there is the availability of parking. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. A couple of really good questions here. So, clearly one thing I mentioned earlier is that there's this balance between preserving the quality of life in the city and allowing for some of the change and the new uses that people want to see. And that's the tension. And you just brought up the tension that I mentioned at the very beginning. So thank you for doing that. And so, I think each person has their perspective on where they fall in where that tension is. And so that's part of the process that we're working out. And if there were easy answers, there wouldn't be 200 plus of us spending an evening together talking about this. We'd know the answer. And so this is the time to actually address some of those tensions and think about that. Some of the areas that have the highest retail rates and are the most attractive are sometimes the most congested. So there isn't necessarily a line drawn that says if you can park easily, it's actually easy. It's a better retail area. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. But you need enough activity to make people want to go there. Congestion without that activity doesn't work. If you have enough activity, people will overcome the congestion because it's worth it to get to those places. And so that's what we need to think through with the alternatives. All right, Patrick.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So a couple of quick questions for you. Do these 3 alternatives have to stand on their own, or are we going to be looking for, because I saw some great components of one that I would probably match with another. Is there room for feedback there to kind of marry some of these ideas in the multiple plans?
Absolutely. And let me just say that what we really wanted to do was test different ideas. And sometimes by testing those ideas, you're going a little bit to the extreme in one. And by doing that, you're not trying to come up with the perfect solution. So what we're trying to do now in this phase is to test these different ideas that are expressed in different ways through the alternatives. Like I said at the beginning, what's going to come forward may very well be a combination of those different alternatives. And the survey allows you to kind of ask, and we have a series of questions for each of the sub areas where we're trying to tease out what it is that you like and don't like, and which alternative you prefer overall, and then changes you would want to make to those. So it absolutely allows for that, a little bit of that picking and choosing.
Great. And then my other question is related to Paul's question and your answer on general plan and what you do. But in going through this, have you factored in some of the market dynamics and ownership dynamics? So for example, you have the redesignations of an area that might have 1 or 2 owners that have a 30% vacancy rate on retail versus a pocket of industrial owners that are 30 owners in one area with 1% vacancy. How does that play into how you guys would look at that? Because I think one of the concerns that comes up is, what is the actual path to when we're picking and choosing to seeing that come to fruition, and what the reality is of that idea coming out in the end?
Yeah. That again, a really good question. We didn't dive in and look at all of the areas and what that ownership pattern is. I think through staff we had a little bit of a sense of that, but I think that as we move forward, we want to think about ownership patterns and likelihood of development. That's where we get into this difference between what is the build out and then what is a growth projection. And when we're thinking about the next 20 years or so, we want to think about, and we're going to dive deeper as we move forward and we do growth projections of what the amount of development, we're going to really think about ownership, the vacant and underutilized land, and then how that relates to what the land use is on there to try and get a much better sense of what could happen in the next 20 years, not necessarily just that long-term vision, which is what we're focused on now.
Okay. And I think you can probably find some of that historically as well, historically now and in the future, and you can marry that up, pretty easily.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from the GPAC? All right. Ian, are there any questions from the public? I'm sure there are a ton of great comments that we can't get to this evening.
Yes, I have one that was asked. I mean, I think you've touched upon it in terms of how it relates to individual private property owners and what they want to do with their property. But there was a specific question in regards to, well, after the general plan is adopted, how would someone go through and propose a general plan change? You know, individuals would have to basically then pursue their own general plan amendment and zone change, and it would have to be analyzed under the general plan and the policies at the time. And, you know, whether, you know, we have things such as Measure E still in place, you know, that may be a factor as well, as far as the consideration of any kind of land use change. But then obviously it is very specific. If you're asking for any kind of residential designation higher than what you currently have, clearly, yeah, Measure E would be come into play while it's still in effect. But so,
Ian, can I add to that, which is that we really do, if you know, property owners in the city, we really and others, we encourage really specific comments on parcels. And you know, again, we know that we're sort of looking at 3 alternatives in a larger area. The interactive online maps will allow you to actually go in and identify a parcel and give what your idea is for that specific parcel or a series of parcels. So there is that opportunity if you're really concerned about, you know, one intersection or a couple of parcels, that you can actually go in and put notes on that, and we will see those notes. Okay, Simran, any other, we have just, we're a little bit over on time here, and I just want to do a quick wrap up. So any final questions from the public, Simran?
Yeah, there are a few questions related to the Measure E 81,000 number, and I think you've answered those for the most part, but I think there's still a little bit of confusion about whether those units have to be built or they're just to be planned for. And I'll again reiterate, the general plan needs to plan for and maintain the 81,000 number. There's no, the fact whether any of those units actually get built or not will depend on the individual property owners.
That's right. Okay, I am going to go back to doing the final screen share here. Okay, so let's talk about the next steps here of what we have. So first, as I had mentioned a couple of times, the virtual office hours. So we have 4 coming up. Thursday, February 11th from 6 to 8 p.m. Wednesday, February 17th from 6 to 8 p.m. Saturday, February 20th from 10 a.m. until noon. And then Tuesday, February 23rd from 10 a.m. until noon. At those meetings, they are really going to be much more informal. We are going to be there and available to answer questions. We can have breakout rooms to have individual conversations or smaller group conversations. We really want everyone to understand what's going on with the land use alternatives so that you are able to make really an informed decision when you do the survey, which is the primary method of giving us feedback. We are also meeting with a series of groups and organizations. So if you are part of a group that wants to meet with us, we're happy to do that. Please send an email to gp@toaks.org, and we can try and schedule something in the next month. As I mentioned, the survey closes on March 1st, so we really want to get those scheduled and met really soon. The next steps moving forward, and this is why the schedule, we are a little bit on a deadline because of the housing element and needing to get the housing element adopted by the end of the year. And we need, in order for that housing element to be adopted, we need to actually have the land use map in place. So in February, there's the virtual office hours and completing the survey. In March, we're going to summarize the results, we're going to have a meeting with the GPAC to have more conversation about the alternatives and trying to get to a preferred alternative, either selecting one or doing more of the picking and choosing. And then we're going to go to the Planning Commission and get their recommendation for a preferred alternative. In April will be City Council meetings and moving to the selection of a preferred alternative. And then May through August is when we work on the housing element. And part of that is this critical process of making sure that we have enough sites, housing sites, parcels, in order to meet the RHNA numbers. The draft general plan and EIR will be out in late fall 2021, if not sooner, and then we'll move to adoption of the general plan in the winter of 2022. So with that, again, I apologize. I know we're a few minutes over. I want to thank everyone for sticking with this tonight. We do understand this is a huge amount of information. We know that this was not a extremely interactive session. We want to make sure that people understood the information, but think about this as part one of the workshop, and the remainder of the workshop is going to happen over the next month when you review the materials and then attend the virtual office hours. The materials are posted on the website at toaks2045.org. And with that, we are going to close the evening. Please feel free to reach out to us at gp@toaks.org so that we can respond to any questions that you have. And for the GPAC, we are going to be scheduling another meeting in early March. Please stay tuned for when that meeting will be. We will go over the survey results as well as the trying to move to a preferred alternative. So with that, we're going to close the meeting this evening. Thank you, everyone, for joining this evening. We really appreciate your time. We appreciate the insight and your great questions. And we will see you all over the next few weeks and into the next month. Thank you all.